Have you ever caught yourself mid-sentence realizing you're explaining something that doesn't need explaining? That moment when you're justifying why you're tired, why you chose to stay home, why you need space, as if your basic human needs require a defense attorney? It's a peculiar kind of exhaustion, isn't it? The constant need to translate your inner world into acceptable explanations for others, as if your feelings were foreign concepts that needed interpretation. There's something deeply unsettling about living in a perpetual state of justification. You find yourself crafting elaborate explanations for the simplest choices. Why? Did you leave the party early? Why don't you want to go out tonight? Why do you need time alone? Each question feels like an interrogation, and somehow you've appointed yourself as both the defendant and the attorney, scrambling to build a case for your own existence. But when did this begin? When did you first learn that being yourself required a lengthy explanation? Perhaps it started in childhood, in those moments when your natural responses were met with confusion or disapproval. Maybe it was the first time someone asked, "Why are you so quiet?" or "Why are you so sensitive?" As if these qualities were flaws requiring justification rather than simply aspects of who you are. The truth is, we live in a world that has taught us to be translators of our own experience. We learn early that our inner landscape needs to be converted into language others can understand and approve of. We become experts at turning feelings into arguments, transforming intuition into logic, reshaping our authentic responses into socially acceptable explanations. This constant translation is exhausting work. It requires you to step outside yourself, to view your own experience through the lens of potential judgment, to preemptively defend choices that arise from your deepest knowing. You begin to monitor yourself like a security guard, watching for any sign of authenticity that might be deemed unacceptable. The most insidious part of this pattern is how it disconnects you from your own truth. When you're constantly explaining yourself, you start to lose touch with the pure, unexplained knowing that guides your choices. You begin to doubt your instincts, questioning whether your feelings are valid if you can't articulate them in ways others approve of. This doubt creates a dangerous cycle. The more you explain, the more you question whether your explanations are good enough. The more you question, the more you feel compelled to explain. You become trapped in a loop of justification that distances you further and further from the simple truth of your experience. Consider how this shows up in your daily life. You apologize for being tired, as if fatigue were a personal failing. You justify your need for solitude as if wanting time alone were somehow antisocial. You explain your boundaries as if having limits were unreasonable. Each explanation is a small betrayal of your own knowing, a signal that you don't trust your own experience to be valid without external approval. The weight of constant explanation becomes a burden you carry everywhere. It's like wearing clothes that don't fit, constantly adjusting and readjusting, trying to make yourself comfortable in a presentation that was never meant for you. You find yourself performing your own life rather than living it, always conscious of the audience, always ready with explanations for choices that spring from your authentic self. This performance is particularly exhausting because it requires you to be multiple people at once. You must be the person having the experience, the person explaining the experience, and the person judging whether the explanation is adequate. You become a committee of one, debating and defending your own existence. The tragedy is that this constant explanation often backfires. The more you try to make others understand, the more misunderstood you often feel. Your explanations become barriers rather than bridges, walls of words that separate you from genuine connection. People begin to respond to your explanations rather than to you, and you find yourself feeling more isolated than ever. What's particularly painful is realizing that those who truly see you rarely need your explanations. They recognize something in you that transcends words, something that doesn't require justification or defense. Meanwhile, those who demand constant explanation are often the ones who will never truly understand, no matter how eloquently you express yourself. This recognition can be both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it reveals the futility of trying to convince those who don't want to see you. Terrifying because it suggests that much of your energy has been spent on an impossible task, trying to earn understanding from those who were never willing to offer it. The fear that drives over-explanation often stems from early experiences of rejection or misunderstanding. Perhaps you learned that being misunderstood meant being alone, that confusion led to abandonment, so you developed an elaborate system of preemptive explanation, hoping to prevent the pain of being unseen or unwanted. But here's what you might not have realized. The act of constant explanation can actually push people away. When you're always defending yourself, others begin to feel like they're in a courtroom rather than a relationship. Your explanations can create the very distance you're trying to prevent. The most profound shift happens when you begin to recognize over-explanation as a form of self-abandonment. Each time you justify what doesn't need justification, you're essentially saying that your inner knowing isn't trustworthy, that your authentic responses aren't acceptable as they are. This recognition is the beginning of a different kind of relationship with yourself and others. It's the moment you begin to consider that maybe, just maybe, you don't owe anyone an explanation for being who you are. Maybe your feelings don't need to be defended. Maybe your choices don't require a jury's approval. The question that begins to emerge is both simple and revolutionary. What would it feel like to trust your own experience without needing others to validate it? What would change if you stopped translating yourself and started simply being yourself? This question opens a door to a different way of existing, one where silence isn't empty space waiting to be filled with explanations, but rather a full, rich presence that needs nothing added to it. It's the beginning of understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop talking and start trusting the wisdom of your own experience. Imagine a moment when you realize that your voice has become a tool of defense rather than expression. You're not speaking to share your truth. You're speaking to protect yourself from judgment, to prevent abandonment, to maintain a version of yourself that others find acceptable. In this moment of recognition, something inside you grows very quiet, and you begin to understand that silence might not be emptiness at all, but rather a return to something essential you've been missing. This kind of silence isn't the uncomfortable quiet that follows an argument or the awkward pause in conversation. It's something entirely different. A conscious choice to stop the endless stream of justification and explanation that has been drowning out your authentic voice. It's the silence that comes when you finally exhale after holding your breath for years. The beauty of this silence is that it asks nothing of you. It doesn't demand that you be articulate or reasonable or easily understood. It simply holds space for whatever is true in you without needing that truth to be palatable to others. In this silence, you begin to hear something you've been missing, the quiet wisdom of your own knowing. This isn't about becoming withdrawn or cutting yourself off from others. It's about learning to differentiate between communication that serves connection and communication that serves fear. When you speak from fear, your words become desperate attempts to control how others see you. When you speak from silence, from that centered place within yourself, your words carry a different quality entirely. The journey into healing silence often begins with recognizing the difference between solitude and loneliness. Loneliness is the ache of feeling unseen and misunderstood. Solitude is the peace of being fully present with yourself, of not needing external validation to feel complete. In solitude, you begin to rediscover parts of yourself that got lost in the noise of constant explanation. This rediscovery can be both beautiful and unsettling. You might find aspects of yourself that you've been trying to explain away or justify for years. You might encounter emotions that don't fit neatly into acceptable categories, desires that don't make logical sense, truths that resist articulation. In the safety of silence, these parts of you can finally breathe. The power of choosing yourself through silence is that it breaks the cycle of seeking external validation. For so long, you may have been waiting for someone else to give you permission to be who you are, to tell you that your feelings are valid, that your choices are acceptable. But this permission was never theirs to give, it was always yours to claim. When you choose yourself, something shifts in your relationship. Those who were drawn to the explained, justified version of you might feel confused or even threatened by your newfound wholeness. They might push for explanations, demand justifications, try to pull you back into the old dynamic. This is where your commitment to yourself is tested. The people who truly belong in your life will recognize this shift as growth rather than rejection. They'll appreciate the authentic presence that emerges when you stop performing your life and start living it. They'll be drawn to the quality of aliveness that comes when you're no longer fragmenting your energy through constant explanation. But let's be honest about the challenge. Choosing yourself can feel selfish when you've been trained to prioritize others' comfort over your own well-being. You might feel guilty for setting boundaries, for saying no without elaborate justification, for trusting your instincts even when they lead you away from what others expect. This guilt is part of the healing process. It's your psyche's way of trying to keep you safe by maintaining familiar patterns, even when those patterns are harmful. The guilt doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're doing something different, and different can feel dangerous to the part of you that learned to survive by being acceptable to others. The transformation that happens through healing silence is subtle but profound. You begin to notice that you have more energy because you're not constantly depleting yourself through explanation and justification. You start to trust your instincts more because you're not drowning them out with the noise of other people's opinions. You discover that your authentic presence is more magnetic than any performance you could create. This isn't about becoming silent in all situations or cutting off communication entirely. It's about learning to speak from choice rather than compulsion, from fullness rather than emptiness, from love rather than fear. When you do speak, your words carry more weight because they come from a place of authenticity rather than desperation. The healing that happens in silence is not passive. It's an active choice to honor your inner experience, to treat your feelings with respect, to trust your wisdom, even when it doesn't make sense to others. It's a practice of internal validation that slowly builds your capacity to be with yourself fully. One of the most beautiful aspects of this journey is how it changes your relationship with being misunderstood. Instead of scrambling to correct every misperception, you begin to realize that being misunderstood by some people is inevitable and even necessary. Not everyone is meant to understand you, and that's not a reflection of your worth or their worth. It's simply the reality of being a unique individual in a complex world. This acceptance of being misunderstood is profoundly liberating. It frees you from the impossible task of trying to be comprehensible to everyone. It allows you to focus your energy on the relationships and activities that truly nourish you, rather than scattering it in attempts to maintain universal approval. The silence that heals is ultimately about coming home to yourself. It's about creating an internal environment where all parts of you are welcome, where your emotions don't need to earn their right to exist through explanation, where your choices are trusted simply because they arise from your authentic knowing. In this homecoming, you discover that you are enough exactly as you are. Not because someone else validates this truth, but because you feel it in your bones, in your breath, in the quiet moments when you're alone with yourself and feel perfectly complete. This completeness doesn't mean you no longer need others or that relationships become unimportant. Instead, you begin to engage with others from a place of wholeness rather than need, from abundance rather than scarcity. You offer your authentic presence rather than a performance, and you attract connections that honor the fullness of who you are. The journey from over-explanation to healing silence is ultimately a journey of self-trust. It's learning to believe in your own experience, to honor your own knowing, to choose yourself even when that choice isn't understood or approved of by others. It's discovering that the most profound healing happens not through words, but through the courageous act of being authentically, unapologetically yourself. In the end, this silence speaks louder than any explanation ever could. It says, I am here, I am whole, and I no longer need your permission to exist as I am. And in that declaration, true healing begins.